So I've always found some interest in the natural sciences ever since I was young, but I think my interest in chemistry really started when I took general chemistry at my first year of high school. I really enjoyed that class, so I decided to take AP chemistry the next year, and that made me realize that I definitely wanted to pursue chemistry in college. After taking the test towards the end of the year, my teacher let me go in the stockroom and design some of my own experiments, and it was really enjoyable and made me really want to pursue research in college. So I participated in some carbon college, gave me opportunities, and I really enjoyed my education there. Classes, labs, and TA and working with other students has been a wonderful experience. And working in Dr. Poe's lab over the summer was fantastic. It was like my first real chemistry job, and I gotta say, as a summer job, it was the first job where I've been surprised when the day was over because the time would go so fast. I would go, oh, it's already lunch. I'd go, oh, it's already time to go home. I've never experienced that. So it made me really certain that I wanted to pursue a career in chemistry. I'm looking forward to working with him again this summer. Once I graduate, I think I would like to work for a little bit before trying to pursue a PhD in grad school, possibly in synthetic or environmental chemistry, I'm not really sure. But I really look forward to a career pursuing my interests and passions, possibly getting to help other people, and I'm very grateful for the scholarship and the opportunities that I have. Thank you so much.
Over there.
And so this year the part of the section decided to award a fourth scholarship, also on Anderson and San and it goes to I guess it used to be Elizabeth Runkle. And before I ask her to come up here and say a few words, I kind of like this wonderful that she wrote an essay. It sort of spells out something we all appreciate as teachers when she was at PCC. And it says, and Elizabeth said about her experience in general chemistry, my general chemistry professor inevitably pressured me to consider pursuing a chemistry major. Suggestions I adamantly refused to his face while quietly considering them I'm with that poet. So, Ellie or Elizabeth, want to congratulate
I would like to begin with sharing a little bit of my gratitude for the Portland State Chemistry Department for nominating me for this award, and the American Chemical Society for awarding it to me. It's an honor to be recognized by both of these institutions. And sharing my experiences with chemistry, I actually got into chemistry a little bit on accident. I went back to school when I was 25 and wanted to be a special education teacher. However, it did not take very long for my professor and my husband to notice my affinity for chemistry, and I was pretty adamant in my refusal to change my major for quite a while until my Gen Chem professor suggested that I could continue teaching in chemistry. So at that point, I was elated at the idea of continuing with being a good influence in my community while also continuing my passion in chemistry. So the challenges of the pandemic obviously impacted my education. I think that my laboratory experience was a little bit stunted, and that was difficult, but I persevered, and I am excited to have applied for a summer research program. Hopefully, I'm still waiting to hear on that. And I'm looking into graduate schools. I hope to graduate my undergrad next spring, and that's it. I still don't really know what I want to be when I grow up, but we'll see where it goes.
So about 2 years ago, the local section created a section board with Tami and James Curry, professors at the Pacific University, respectively, to honor a rising junior secondary student who doesn't necessarily have to major in chemistry, but does really well in chemistry. And it's specifically for students that have been underrepresented in this field. And I would say the last 2 years, some of the students, recipients, their essays have been really hard. And it's been an honor to sort of be able to recognize them and also to help them along this career. But in addition to honoring the student, I think in this case, so today, it's really about acknowledging the positive role that high school teachers have made in all choices, and especially in this recipient's decisions. And she wrote about her high school teacher, about someone that she said, I could thank for my abundant appreciation for the sciences. The high school teacher believed in me, encouraged me to pursue more than what was presented to me, to listen to myself, and believe in my skills. She never ever doubted myself, not once, because she always told me that I can accomplish good things as long as I stand my ground. So I think as much as the scholarship is to give it to Abigail, honor James, Curry, and Tami, it's also to honor some really excellent high school teachers that are forced to be
First of all, I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity to be here today. Truly, I wouldn't be here if I didn't have the support of all of my teachers in the past, helping me out to get to this point that I am today. Growing up, I never thought that I would be, unlike many people, I never thought that I would end up doing anything STEM. I wasn't much of like a science person. It wasn't until I got into high school, my junior year, when I met my teacher, Ms. Coleman, where I really was able to appreciate what it was to do sciences. I think I really appreciate the curiosity that it sparks in people. And so, with that in mind in the future, I would love to end up becoming a professor. I know I'm going to end up doing graduate school and getting my PhD in chemistry, just because I really loved doing this. But yeah, I would love to either be a professor or even a high school teacher, just to be able to give back what I've been given. That spark that she gave me, I will forever be grateful for. So I would love to be able to give back that appreciation for education and for kids. So thank you very much.
All right, those of you that were here for the social hour, and I mentioned that some people felt me very unsocial, I'm going to attempt to keep myself calmed down and let you know about one more awardee of a prize that comes directly from the local ACS section to high school students, whether they be freshmen through seniors. So we have some very special awards tonight. One of them is for the Outstanding Chemistry Project for any age, any grade, I guess would be appropriate. And the winner of that award, incidentally, our certificates and awards were presented at the night of the Northwest Science Expo ceremonies. So I failed to mention it was NWSE, but whoever's taking the pictures around here marked, I guess. I don't think we have any from the ceremony, so some sort of handshake or something like that. That's what makes me social. So for the American Chemical Society Portland section, award entitled Best Chemistry Project, pretty simple, goes to Shri Moya Saha. And her poster has been on display up here for some time. If you get a chance later on this evening to walk by and take a look at it, you'll see what a fantastic job she did. And you can ask her some questions and find out where she might be going with this. So anyway, as the name implies, dual doped carbon electrodes, CO2 reduction is already a good processes are being examined for that, but cost effective is a big deal as well. So that's what word mark is on. Cost effective methods perhaps developing carbon dioxide. So Shimoya, if you'd like to come up, that would be fine. We do not have any prepared speeches for the awardees. We didn't want to put them on the spot too much, so just a couple of quick questions. I'll let you do this topic.
It's okay, I'll impromptu it. Honestly, with STEM in general, I knew from a young age that I loved it. And I think in elementary school, science fair used to be a thing, though it's not anymore, unfortunately. But one thing that I remember doing was essentially how do glow sticks work. And me being a tiny first grader, I was curious. And then as I grew up, I got more and more into chemistry, and my grandpa is a chemist professor, or was, in India. And I think that just led me to loving chemistry and pursuing it. And so while I don't know what specific type or what I want to do as a major, I really love this area of science and I really hope to pursue it. So thank you. Yes. Thank you so much.
We'll now have Harry Davis introduce the HICA awardee, Portland Industrial Chemistry Association.
Well, I have to start off by telling you a little bit of an entertaining story because the way this award came about was, to me, entertaining at least. Along with Nick, I was a judge for special awards, special high school awards at the NWSE, recent NWSE, for the American Chemical Society. And we had chosen the award winner, we just received an award for chemistry, but another special part of the American Chemical Society Awards goes to a project which has more practical applications in terms of chemistry, and there wasn't another poster presentation in the pure chemistry section that really fit into this category, and so Nick and another judge and I were talking about, well, who are we going to give this HICA award to? There's nobody in chemistry that really fits into that category. Well, following the initial going through looking at the posters, I had stopped by the DT's poster just to chat a little bit, and I got there and she stood up and was telling me about her project and asked me, well, what area are you from? I said, I'm from the chemistry area. And it was like her eyes lit up. Finally, I could talk about chemistry. Because her project was in the electrical engineering, is that right?
Yeah.
So she was so excited to get up and talk about her project in terms of the chemistry that happens. And if you look at her poster, you will see that she has done really a remarkable job of combining some electrical circuitry along with spectroscopic techniques to develop a little device that can easily measure some pollutants in water systems. So I'd like to ask Aditi to come up here and introduce herself. She may not write for herself, so I've got to do it for her because Aditi's a senior and has already been accepted to both Stanford and Caltech. No, I told her Caltech's where you go, but she's just Stanford. So anyway.
So hi, I'm Aditi. I'm a senior from Wilsonville High School. And so basically what inspired me to do my project is that like humans have three essential needs, right? Food, water, and shelter. But Earth is running out of fresh water. And eutrophication or over-application of nutrients that lead to algae blooms and other environmental hazards are what basically causes lack in fresh water around our world. So I wanted to create a device that could detect nutrients such as nitrates and ammoniums and phosphates and sulfates to kind of alert people to the over-application of nutrients that they participate in and hopefully solve eutrophication and save our Earth's fresh water. And as Harry just said, I am going to go to Stanford next year and pursue a degree in computer science, hopefully with a minor in chemistry or electrical engineering, because I do really like the application side of science as well. Yeah.
So I think we've got about 5 minutes. If we want to take a break, the restrooms just outside, and we will start with the main show. Tami, Lasseter, Clare.
I guess
good chemistry happening. And I'm really happy we can try that to this evening's presenter, Dr. Tami Lasseter, Clare from Portland State. I saw Tami give a talk, I don't even know the number of years ago, I guess since 2009 you've been at TSU, so it was more recent than that at least.
No, I think it was close to 2009.
And it was wonderful. So Tami's background, she went to UW as an undergraduate, a bachelor's degree in biochemistry, then material science in Wisconsin, so seems straight ahead, going into research science, and all of a sudden there's a veer that happens in her postdoc, where she heads off to Philadelphia and joins a conservation program at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, or whatever their training is, I forgot. Anyway, and all of a sudden you see these two fields merging. And at that point in my life, I hadn't really seen how much chemistry could inform the study of art and the preservation of art. It was really wonderful talk. And that one was principally, I think, on, as you mentioned, metal corrosion and trying to preserve surfaces. What is exciting to me is I've known one of the graduate students since then who's working in a completely different area on inks and manuscripts, and then the talk this evening will be on textiles. And it just goes to show that if you've got the tools of a chemist, really you can go pretty much anywhere in the art world and find something of interest to do. And so I'm really looking forward to the presentation. And thanks so much for coming and speaking this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. Congratulations to all of the students on your success and your awards so far. It's exciting to see your interest in chemistry. And if I can just take a moment, I'll tell you a little bit more about that transition that Arthur mentioned, that in graduate school I was doing surface chemistry, studying semiconductors on surfaces. And when I was a graduate student, 9/11 happened, and after 9/11, then there was a lot of support, financial support, for the study of toxins and for the detection of potential bioterror weapons. And so then I started studying botulinum neurotoxin on surfaces. And so I was working in Wisconsin where the dairy industry is a large part of the economy. And so people wanted to know if you could detect botulinum neurotoxin in milk. And so to do that, botulinum neurotoxin is a protein. Of course, milk is a protein as well. So you have to screen out protein in a whole sea of proteins. So it's a very challenging problem. And the skills that I developed were in surface chemistry. And of course, art has surfaces. So it was at the end of graduate school when I started applying to jobs. I had a very enlightening interview, and so I do encourage everybody to interview whenever you have the chance. It will be enlightening. Anyway, so I did well in the interview, left the interview. My husband picked me up in the car. We had one car and we drove down from Madison to Chicago area for these interviews. And he asked me how did it go. And I burst into tears. And I envisioned my life entering that building and leaving that building, and I did not see a happy future. And so it was in that time that I realized I need to find something that's going to make me happy. And so I really started trying to figure out what it is I wanted to do and what skills I had and where could I go with these skills. And so I realized I've always loved art and I have these skills and I can do art conservation. And somehow I learned of the field art conservation. I'm not exactly sure how I learned of it. But anyway, that's how I got to be where I was. And my first job, I had 2 part-time positions so that I could get into this field. I taught at the University of Pennsylvania in the Historic Preservation Program and at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And then from there I wrote grant proposals and got a postdoc funded from the National Science Foundation and then funding from the IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. The ACS was hiring and I had a grant. And so anyway, one thing has led to another and it's been okay from here on out. So now I can tell a good story. But I can say that in the moment I didn't know where I was going. And so I heard that from a lot of you saying, I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I just want to tell you, it's okay to not know where you want to go, but definitely do some soul searching to try to figure out what skills you have and how can you apply it. So I'm going to talk tonight about a project that is in collaboration with the Alaska State Museum and the Chilkat Dye Working Group. And so this is an ad hoc group that came together at the start of this project. And I've titled the talk, Missing Elements, using chemistry to see the invisible. So the story begins here in Alaska, in the greater Chilkat watershed. In this region is where Chilkat weaving takes place. So Chilkat weaving is a very particular style of weaving. And here's an example of a Chilkat robe. Every aspect of Chilkat weaving is unique. There are two types of thread. There's the warp and the weft. I'll talk more about those. The design is curvilinear. So let me show you here. If you want to represent a curvilinear pattern in a rectilinear type of weaving, so where you have the warp fibers being vertical and the weft fibers being horizontal. If you want to represent a curvilinear pattern, like a circle, you cannot do that very accurately in a rectilinear type of weaving. But in curvilinear weaving, you can. And so you can see that the mouth forms, for example, are precisely curved. And so the way that Chilkat weaving is done is that only the warp strands are attached at the top of the loom, and that they hang loosely below, and then the weft is able to be woven throughout. This is one of the most complex weaving styles in the world, and is practiced by a very small number of weavers. In fact, at any point in history, there have been fewer than a dozen Chilkat weavers. And Chilkat weaving dates back at least 200 years, but beyond that, the written records become scant. So we don't know exactly how old Chilkat weaving is. So as I mentioned, some of my collaborators are from the Alaska State Museum. There's a conservator by the name of Dr. Ellen Harley. She is a conservator as opposed to a conservation scientist, which is what I would classify myself as. Her expertise is in understanding how to preserve materials, so doing the hands-on work. The distinction between conservation science is I develop materials to better conserve works of art, or I develop sensors to determine when art starts to fail, or I do analysis on materials to learn something about perhaps the degradation of those materials, or perhaps about technical art historical questions, like where did these artists get these materials? Did they have to trade for them? So Ellen knew of me through this field that we are in, and so she started the Chilkat Dye Working Group along with an indigenous weaver. And so that weaver came to her, and this is part of the Chilkat Dye Working Group. Some of the members, all of their names are listed up there, as well as additional not shown. They wanted to know more about their ancestral dye practices. They wanted to know what were the original dye materials that our ancestors used. Would we want to continue to use those, or do we want to choose different materials? And there are reasons for both. Perhaps you want to become closer to the ancestors and practice techniques the way they did, or perhaps you want to choose materials that are more light-fast, that won't fade as easily. Anyway, the knowledge, the hope is that the knowledge is there, and they're free to make the choices that they would like. So, as part of this collaboration, we also worked with the public television station in Juneau called KTOO. And they produced a documentary about this collaboration. And I would like to show you the documentary. It's 30 minutes in length. And so that will be about half of the time here. It's really important for you to hear about this project from my collaborators in their own voices and from their own perspectives, because this collaboration really is about them. So, if you're interested in watching the documentary another time, please feel free to take a photo of this QR code. But I will now open the documentary.
This program was made possible in part by Portland State University, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and the Pacific Northwest Conservation Science Consortium. Also, a grant from the Alaska Center for Excellence in Journalism. And viewers like you, Gavashish Hawa, thank you.
Weaving chilcat blankets is like merging in this universal consciousness, spiritual area of being human. We talk about the chilcat dancing blanket as a veil between worlds, like the closest we can get to the spirit realm without crossing over. It's a practice in meditation and also surrender. Because I can come to the work thinking I'm going to make a particular shape, I'm going to finesse this particular ovoid, and if I'm pushing my will on the work, I'm going to screw it up. But if I can take my ego and my will out of it and surrender to what this being wants to become, kind of like shaping a human, the work seems to come to life effortlessly. Or at least thinking she was going to come to the studio during those hours. At any given point since the early 1900s, there have been fewer than 12 chilcat dancing blanket makers in the Northwest Coast. There are many practitioners who have woven a circle or a small apron or smaller like dance leggings or a headdress, but the undertaking of warping up a chilcat dancing blanket is so massive. It's a slow art form with very little gratification checkpoints. A single blanket takes 6 to 8 weeks of preparation, even before twining the first stitch, like putting in the first woven row. Having someone make your loom for you, or harvesting cedar bark, prepping the wool, whether it's mountain goat or merino, spinning the cedar and wool together, washing it, measuring it, hanging it on the loom bars, just to be able to start weaving.
You got those simmering like 1045? Yes, I do. Okay, so and we've got the chocolate lily, and then there's a little marsh marigold. I remember when you got that at Cowie last week.
I've been part of this chilcat dye working group for a couple of years now, meeting once a month, getting together as like kind of a brain trust. All of us throwing ideas, like what were the blues, what were the yellows?
Baking soda, but look, this one's with baking soda and that one's with no baking soda.
My job involves the preservation and the restoration of collections here. So I'm supposed to know what things are made of, how they might deteriorate over time, and how we could keep them for 500 years.
We want like that.
Art and science are things that are sometimes kept separate in our academic structure, in Euro-American learning methods, but they don't tend to be separated in this way in a lot of other cultures. And so conservation as a profession is one of those rare places that art and science are brought together. And in this particular project, the chemistry and the science of what the dyes are made out of brought together with why these dyes are used in these colors and these plants by the knowledge and expertise of the weavers is this exciting overlap of these different kinds of expertise.
George Emmons, an ethnographer in the 1900s, wrote about the different dyes that we thought were used in our blankets So over the last couple of years, we've done all this research on, is it true, how these colors came about, with the goal of building a database to dye these different colors.
Less, like more purpley than slate silver, I think.
I'm Tami Lasseter, Clare. I'm an associate professor of chemistry at Portland State University, and I'm the director of the Pacific Northwest Conservation Science Consortium. The Chilkat Dye Working Group approached Ellen with a request to learn more about dye stuffs, and so they're interested in connecting to their ancestral weaving community, and a lot of that knowledge has either been lost or it's only been partially recorded. And so we're trying to provide them with that knowledge back so that they can make choices about what kind of dyes they use, whether they use ancestral dyes or whether they choose to use other dyes that might have properties that they prefer.
I haven't analyzed these yet, so I can run this 1 minute sample.
Yeah.
We receive these samples and we begin with the non-destructive analysis. So non-destructive analysis is X-ray fluorescence, which is an elemental technique, and that tells us about mordants and metals on the fibers. And then we do visual microscopy, which is just taking photos of the fibers underneath the microscope, so we can document the colors and the texture of the fiber and the size of the fibers.
It shows that the wool that you used is clean.
Right.
It's not contaminated with anything.
Any other metals.
Right. So Chilkat weaving utilizes 3 main dye colors. So there's a yellow, there's blue-green, and there's brown-black, along with undyed wool. So white is the undyed wool. So we want to identify what all of the colorants are, and that sounds like a simple question, just 3 colors. In fact, natural dyes were used, synthetic dyes were used, and so in reality, the candidates of dye colors number in the hundreds.
Some of the things the chemists have found with the old robes is that a lot of the blacks are synthetic blacks. They are black yarns that weavers bought, even 100 years ago or more, because you could buy black wool yarn through the market. But the yellows and the blues were harder to get.
We did so much research, finding all the different kinds of flowers, pink flowers, purple flowers, green leaves, like all the things, thinking, oh, you're gonna get a violet or something, and they're yellow, and more yellow, and then it's not yellow, it's brown.
Yellow is an easy color to get. If you were to go and pick a flower out on the landscape right now and smash it up and make a dye bath out of it, doesn't matter what color the blossom is, it's probably going to make yellow. But the really most interesting thing about the yellows, I think, is a yellow that's very popular for this Chilkat weaving. It's called wolf moss. Wolf moss is actually a lichen, which is not the same biological family as moss is, but wolf moss grows up in trees, and you can take this moss and put it in a dye bath, like with water or with urine. It works even better with urine. Get this lovely, warm, golden yellow that the weavers love. But here's the kicker with the wolf moss. It doesn't grow in our rainforest. So they had to trade for it in drier areas that border our rainforest. So more in interior Canada or down in Oregon, and it was a trade item. So why would they trade for something to get a yellow that they could get with substances that they had here?
I think the significance in wolf moss is that we can dye whenever we want. Once we have it in our possession and it's dry, it is shelf stable for 25 years. We can use it at any point during the year, at any point next year, that we can dye yellow whenever we need it. That's not true for most of the other items in Southeast Alaska that, if we get horsetails, we have to dye with them right then. We've always been really good at sourcing materials that are useful and shelf stable
The blue, green, or turquoise colors that are used in Chilkat robes have been pretty challenging for us in a research point of view because blue can be a really hard color to make. Folks that know Renaissance painting know that lapis lazuli was this mineral that you ground up and it was super expensive and they only used it for the robe of the Virgin Mary. And I mean, for time immemorial, like blue has been a hard color to make.
Is our hypothesized method of getting a blue liquid, and we've been using this a long time.
From what weavers tell us, one of the ways that is still used is you take a copper pipe and you put it in ammonia and you let it soak. You get this kind of boring, steely, grayish color.
This is not a color that I would weave with.
But if you dip that in vinegar, so you're changing the pH, you get kind of this nice minty green.
Oh my goodness, stirring it around in the vinegar. This is a color that we want to weave with.
Interestingly, there's a robe that's on exhibit right now that has that minty seafoam green in the fringe. We used our XRF, our X-ray fluorescent spectrometer, to try to identify that we hoped this was the color, that it was this copper color, right? And it doesn't have any copper in it. So there was some other way they were getting this minty green besides copper.
Indigenous peoples, no matter where you go in the world, have always been adapting, right? If climate change is coming, we move our communities inland. If we don't have access to these particular dye materials anymore, and it's easier to get it from the army guys who have come up the coast, we might adapt to that.
The weavers, it's thought, maybe extracted indigo from trade cloths. And so these would be maybe blankets from ships that came up and weavers reused that dye to dye their own fibers. And so far, we have found no evidence of indigo, and we've gone through a lot of reality checks to make sure that our instrumentation can detect indigo if it's there, and we can say that there is no indigo on our samples.
We knew that there was a meadow that had a lot of a flower called chocolate lily that we had read might be one of the rare plants that could give us a blue.
There you go.
This is so beautiful. I've been out here and hiked the Lasseter and taken a really see that. I saw an eagle.
It does say it's rather too soon. The bulbs may taste bitter. But we're interested not so much in eating it as seeing if we can dye with it.
Right.
So there's preparing, dig around the base of the plant and gently pull up the bulb, break bulbs apart to get the kernels, leave a few kernels to replenish.
Oh, nice.
Bulbs can be soaked in water overnight, then boiled for an hour to remove the bitterness.
Hoping we got some chocolate lilies. Oh, here we go. And it's a nice mossy area too.
Here we go. See, it's coming up. I think I'll take on one plant, just join me at home. You know, when I dye or when I weave, I feel like these are things that ancestors have done that I don't even know those ancestors. They were just there at one time, and then history happens and takes people along the bends and river, and you may or may not connect directly, but through the knowledge getting shared, it makes me realize that that knowledge is there. We just have to be open to it.
That would be really lovely. One of those old-fashioned drawings where you see the green and the brown of the flower and the green of the leaves and stem.
One of the things I think that's important about the colorants is that you could go to Joann Fabrics or you could go on the internet and you could order yarn in whatever color you want it to be. But that's a little bit detached from the relationships of the place that we're in. If you're going out on the land with your friends and other weavers and you're out in nature and you're looking for this plant and you're hiking and you're having a picnic together and you're building relationships with the place that you live, there's a wellness component to that and an investment in the relationships with the place that you live and with the people that you're with that is powerful. It's all of these things that involve this whole network of relationships between people and the land and plants and songs and the language and all these things combined together to make that robe. And so the virtuosity to make that rope again isn't the thing that matters. It's that whole networking web of relationships that matters. And that whole ongoing network of relationships is something that can come back and be strong and be built in new ways to continue new weavings and new ways of making things and being creative.
As you're weaving, you start having more questions and leaning on each other for answers, you know, looking around and saying, well, how would you do this? And so I think it gives you courage and also encouragement. I've been weaving for about 2 years. I learned originally from Lily Hope. Lily Hope is learned from her mother, but she's wealth of knowledge for teachers and always encourages us to ask more of the questions we have. She's taught a lot of people to weave, partly because she sees it as an intergenerational, almost responsibility.
Once I was in class and being with other people and weaving with other people and watching these patterns come to life, it did become kind of a joy, but I didn't realize that I was building a life of being a weaver until my mother died in December 2016. I was spending time with her, dyeing yarns, spinning warp, prepping cedar bark, harvesting cedar bark. I was doing all the things to be a weaver, and yet at no point did she ever say to me, this is your life work. You understand that you're taking my place. You understand that you're one of my students who will continue the work.
I learned it from, what's his name? His name's really white. He just cuts a strand that's as long as his arm and he just weaves. Cool. That's nice. Yeah, I wouldn't mind putting a dress.
At some point, I'd really like to pivot my work toward intentionally welcoming people who are returning to themselves and remembering their culture and their identities. I think the chook hat weaving particularly holds a lot of that space. Weaving our identities, weaving for our families is a huge part of the healing. Remembering who we are and why we're here.
Thank you for being here today. Goodness cheese. Oh my gosh. Oh, I want you to listen to me.
I was fortunate a couple of years ago that we had a Tlingit culture bearer on staff here at the Alaska State Museum by the name of Lyanna Wallace. And Lyanna saw the conservation lab, kind of heard about what we do as conservators, and said, would it be amazing to have a project that we were exploring dyes and the chemicals and what things are made of, and we were all talking about these together, right? And that was the key thing, was getting someone who's a cultural expert in at the ground level of this research to kind of guide what direction we were going in, what kind of questions were important to the community.
Did you already test it?
No, we didn't.
No loose threads anymore?
But we could ask permission. Museums do have this long legacy of being takers and having bad relationships with indigenous communities and minority communities of all kinds.
The scientific community, and STEM in particular, has a history of studying cultural practices, but not actually including people from those areas in their actual research. Like George Evans, where he was in Alaska, he was a naval lieutenant, he observed things, he took photographs, and then he kind of took all that information and went to Chicago, or went to the East Coast, where he was from, and spread that information as his own findings. And the planning community wasn't really involved in that. So he presented all these findings at the National Field Museum, at rural expositions, because people were really interested in it. But no representatives from those communities in Alaska were present.
For museums, one of the big things that has been a driver in the change in these relationships was something called NAGPRA, the North American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So this federal legislation happened around 1989, 1990, and required museums to give back human remains, grave goods, ceremonial materials to source communities. There was a real change in the way museums and communities interfaced with each other. And in some cases, things were just straight up given back to communities. There were Chilkat robes that were part of important ceremonies that were returned to the clan that they came from. Particularly in our museum, there were robes that the clan would say, this could come back to our clan, but we don't really have the fire suppression systems, the insurance, the pest control, like all these things that museums do to protect their collections. How about we have this stay in your collection storage under this, in this great building, and if it needs to be on exhibit, sometimes it could be, but then we'll check it out when we need it for our ceremonial purposes. So the Alaska State Museum is innovative, on a national and international level in terms of this ceremonial use program.
There are a few weavers who have absolutely no intention ever to sell their Chilkat blanket work, their Chilkat weavings. They don't want it to be an object for sale because this is our historical documents. This is who we are as a people. Like, how do you sell your history? How do you sell your identity? And that's where you need to be careful in making work that is for museums or art collectors, that there are specific designs I will not weave for sale. I'm not going to weave a clan crest on a blanket unless that clan has commissioned me to do so.
The Chilkat Dye Project has been a really interesting research question because you're building relationships with the place that you live. The chemists cannot tell us that. You can't figure that out through a microscope or through laboratory experiments. It's something that's more going to come from what the communities know, what the weavers know, what the cultural practices are. So it's an interesting research conundrum that has to be answered by kind of a collaborative method.
What I'd love to see with this is the ability to trace the dye stuffs that are used in each individual blanket, that at some point we could go to the backside of any blanket you have time, take the tiniest little hairs of the 4 colors that are used, send it down to Portland State University chemists, and they could send us back a little, like, these are the dyes that were used. I bet collectors would love that. I bet museums would love to have that information. I know that I would, just to be able to go to the different museums and say, oh look, these 4 were actually used with wolf moss, or these ones didn't dye their dark brown with hemlock bark. Look at what it was. And whether we use the natural dyes consistently for the next few hundred years, or if we continue to use acid dyes, I don't know if that's important. But knowing what we did do, and learning from it, and choosing to either go there or not go there again, I like having the option. Because then it rounds out the story. It tells us more about who these people were and where they were and what they had access to. Yeah, it really helps bring that story into reality.
Well, I think that's a fantastic introduction to now telling you more about what we've learned and how we have learned these things. So through this collaboration, the collaborators whom you met in the documentary sampled from the blankets. They sampled usually from the backs of the blankets where the threads were tied together so that there's no damage to the structure of the blanket. And the amount of sample that we asked for, we said, give us about 3 to 4 eyelashes worth. We felt like that was a good descriptive and understandable amount, barring the use of microbalances. So these are the blankets that we were provided samples from. And based on oral histories, we have a rough timeline of when these blankets were acquired. And so that's how they're laid out here, acquired by museums or where there's historical documentation about them. But we don't know exactly how old any of these blankets are. Well, except for in a few cases. We know. Okay, and so you've already learned the colors of chilkat weaving. There are 4 colors. 3 of them are obtained from dyeing, and then 1 is the non-dyed wool background. So as you saw, the Chilkat Dye Working Group spent a long time gathering natural materials from the land, and their hope was that they would discover blue dyes as well as yellow dyes. They mostly found yellows, as they said. The chemistry of most of these yellow dyes are flavonoid dyes. And so the general structure of a flavonoid is shown here. Most of these plants shown up here actually produce quercetin, this particular colored dye. And quercetin itself doesn't bind to the protein backbone of wool. And so the chemists and biochemists here recognize that this is the background of wool, the backbone of the wool polymer. So to fix the dye onto the wool, to make it so that it will not wash out, you need to use something called a mordant. And here we have iron, which complexes in the middle. And so that fastens the dye to the wool itself. So anyway, the mordant leaves a signature. We can identify the fact that there's iron present. So the scope of this study, we had about 23 items, 23 woven textiles, as well as a few loose yarn balls. And from those 23 items, they sent us 111 samples. 32 of those are blue, 44 yellow, and 35 black. So here are just some representative pictures of where these samples were taken from, and in these cases, these are generously large samples. They needn't to be this large. But sometimes they provided us with larger amounts, and these we used as our first analyses after, of course, analyzing many different reference materials. So the Chilkat dye working group also provided us with reference materials, dyed fibers that they had made. And so we used their reference materials to evaluate our analytical process. So the analytical process that we undertook in my lab was first to visually characterize the samples, so take photographs of them, recording the color, and then doing X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. And so XRF is a technique that allows you to identify the metals that are present, so the mordants, for example. And so then that allowed us to make groupings of the fibers based on their commonalities. And then we did a lot of mass spectrometry, so there are some mass spec techniques that do not consume the sample, where the sample itself is preserved. So here's one called DART. This is direct analysis in real time. And so you can hold a sample in front of the ion beam, and the ion beam will shoot out charged molecules that then transfer their charge onto the molecules within the fiber that are then drawn into the mass analyzer. So you could hold a chunk of wool in front of the mass analyzer, you could hold a gummy bear, anything you want to identify. As an alternative, we can also do separation spectroscopies. So we can extract the dyes off of the fiber and then do mass spectrometry after the fact. Finally, we can do surface-enhanced Raman spectroscopy to identify the whole molecules that are present. And so each one of these analytical techniques has its own benefits. In some cases, the sample is preserved. In other cases, it's partially consumed. So we worked through the process in this order so that we could gather as much information from as small samples as possible without destroying the sample until absolutely necessary. So for example, when it came time to extract colors off of our fibers, we could then classify them by color. And so the blues, you can see, roughly look like blue or clear, and the yellows look like shades of yellow. The blacks were quite distinct. They had many different bright colors. And so, these then helped us formulate further hypotheses. For example, blacks that had sort of the lavender hue, we hypothesized, well, maybe these could be related dyes, if not the same type of dye. And as I said, we then wanted to look at mordants, the particular atoms that fix the dyes onto the wool background. And so we then used X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. We could see that some of the dyes had copper, some of them had iron, some of them had chromium. So these were the major types of mordants that we found. Historically, of course, copper and iron have been used. Iron has been used as a fixative for iron gall inks and manuscripts for hundreds of years, and as well in dyeing processes as well. Chromium is more modern, starting in about the late 19th century, mid to late 19th century. Chromium came into use. But we did indeed find a lot of chromium present. In fact, we mostly found chromium present on the fibers that looked visually black. On fibers that looked visually brown, we found a lot of copper present. And so that was a distinction. And sometimes on some of the black fibers, we also found arsenic. And you can see arsenic over here. And arsenic was used in dyeing, and initially black dyed textiles were associated with toxicity. And of course it was for the reason because they contained arsenic. So arsenic is no longer used in dyeing, but it was in the 19th century. So following X-ray fluorescence analysis, we could then undertake some mass spectrometry. And so here is a short little movie of what is happening when that wool sample is held in front of the DART mass analyzer. And so notice this is the structure of volcanic acid, and you will see a peak growing in. Here it is at 321. And so this is the fiber being held into the ion path and taken out. Okay, so that's the signature peak for volcanic acid. So this is one of the most satisfying and simplest identifications that we were able to make. and it's very nice because it does connect to the historical record as well. Emmons wrote about wolf lichen being used, and we found volpinic acid. Now, volpinic acid is present in other lichens, not just wolf lichen, but it is present in very, very high abundances in wolf lichen. So we know that the yellow is a lichen dye in many cases. For other types of mass spectrometry, we used gas chromatography and pyrolysis gas chromatography, and each one of those provided us with different insights. So for example, for the black and brown dyes, we found evidence that they used hemlock bark. And so this molecule here is gallic acid, and so gallic acid plus copper gives us this 232 peak. Now, you may know that copper has two isotopes. There's copper 63 and copper 65. And so 232 is iron gall complexed with copper 63, and 234 and change is gallic acid complexed with copper 65. Okay, and then here we have these missing protons from the gallic acid. The Chilkat dye story is very interesting in that it overlaps with a period in synthetic chemistry that is also very interesting. So it overlaps with the period of inventions of synthetic dyes. And so starting in about the 1860s, the mid-1860s, many synthetic dyes were invented. And so this graph shows the number of dyes that were invented as a function of time. And so you can see that azo dyes in particular are the red dyes, anthraquinones are the yellows, sulfides are the greens, xanthines are the pinks, triphenylmethanes are the grays, and indigoids are the blues. So there were more than 1,200 dyes invented in these few decades. And then World War I started, and because much of dye chemistry was happening in Germany, and as well because of importing restrictions, there was a period during World War I and post-World War I known as the dye crisis, where availability of dyes was scarce. And so it's possible then that Chilkat weavers then returned to natural dyes rather than using synthetic dyes. In our analysis, we did find a lot of evidence of the use of synthetic blue dyes, even from the earliest periods. And so here you can see 3 different blankets. The bottom traces are the surface-enhanced Raman spectra for 3 different blankets. And then these top 2 spectra are reference spectra for crystal violet and methyl violet. And so both of those molecules fall into the class of triaryl dyes. Okay. And so these dyes were among the earliest synthetic blues invented in 1861 for crystal violet. So we don't know whether this blanket was woven in 1861, but we know it could not have been woven prior to 1861. We looked also for the presence of indigo, because in the historical records, it was thought that perhaps there could have been indigo used from trade blankets, or because indigo was a blue dye that was known at the time. And so we spent a lot of time really trying hard to find indigo. So this black spectrum shows a reference spectrum of what indigotin looks like. So this is a breakdown product of indigo. And so here you can see that peak, and you can see 3 representative spectra from different blankets that do not have any similarity with indigotin. So just this is a small snippet of the large amount of data that we tried to collect to show that indigo was or was not present. The results also pointed to some really interesting connections. So this particular textile, which is interesting because it is pieced together, and some textiles in Chilkat in the Tlingit community were cut apart and fastened back together, so they could have been cut apart and given as gifts. And there are several other reasons why they may have been separated. Anyway, what you can see is that there appears to be selective moth damage in certain areas. So specifically the non-dyed wool and the blue regions. The moths seem to have left alone the yellow and the black. And so what the analysis showed is that pesticides were found in the black, paratrichlorobenzene or paradichlorobenzene, and volcanic acid is shown in the yellow. So volcanic acid gets its name because shepherds took wolf lichen and rubbed it into meat and tried to feed it to wolves to protect their flock. And so, so volcanic acid is toxic. And so here you can see evidence that it is apparently toxic to moths as well, or at least tastes really bad. So summarizing all of the years of work that went into this, there are three major classes of dyes, as you know. So the yellows were broken out into primarily natural yellows. About half of these were flavonoids, and about half of them were wolf lichens. On one of the textiles analyzed, the yellow was entirely synthetic. In other areas, in other samples, it was a mixture of natural and synthetics. And so whether these were applied as mixtures or whether there was sequential over-dyeing, perhaps one of the dyes may have been faded and then it was refreshed with an additional dye after the fact, isn't known, but there's a mixture. In the case of the blues, they're mostly synthetic. In some of the blues, there's a natural yellow that was over-dyed to tone the blue color to perhaps make it more turquoise in color. And for the blacks and browns, they were about half natural, half from hemlock bark, and about half synthetic. And for some, each classification also had some samples that we couldn't make definitive conclusions about, mostly because the color was heavily faded, or perhaps because the dye molecules were degraded, or of course, those two are connected. So where do we go from here? So through this project and through the collaboration and the formation of the Chilkat Dye Working Group, there's really been a resurgence of interest in Chilkat weaving within the community around Juneau. You can see here that some of the weavers during the pandemic wove Chilkat masks, and it's particularly poignant in that in some cases they used wolf lichen in their dyeing, and wolf lichen being toxic. I like the connection that perhaps it's to ward off the pestilence in the air. Of course, here you can see this weaver is wearing a nice mask underneath. So, of course. I hope that this research helps this community regain some of the knowledge that has been lost through time because of threats in the community, because of boarding schools and some of the challenges that have happened with the indigenous communities around Juneau, where their culture was forcefully suppressed. And I hope that it also gives them choices, that they feel that they have the agency to choose whether to use ancestral dyes or whether they choose to use synthetic dyes. And I also find it very interesting that from the earliest times when synthetic dyes became available, Chilkat weavers embraced that technology. They saw the benefits in trying out new technologies. And so I think that that is also revealing about their community too. So of course you know that this project is part of a large collaboration. Particularly important in this project is Dario Gerastanti, and Dario defended his thesis last week on this project, Dr. Dario Gerastanti. Here he is. So he did a massive amount of work over the years on this project, and so this is largely his work. thank you all for your attention. I'm happy to take questions.
So I have a question. Is there any new invention coming in the dye technology any further? Like you have shown until 1925. But after that, anything beyond that until now, any further invention in this area?
So by and large, the basic dye structures like triaromethanes, for example, that backbone persists in current dyes. But it's kind of the bells and whistles attached to the triaromethane structure, like maybe it has some hydroxyls or a methyl ester or something that changes the color slightly or makes it more light fast. In terms of major classifications, there's nothing new. Sometimes as well, is for black dyes in particular, to get that black chromophore, as you know, you have to absorb many different colors of light. And so blacks might have multiple functional groups attached together. So it might be an azo sulfide dye, so two different molecules essentially connected. So they get very complicated.
Thank you. Amazing work.
Are there other areas of the world where you're interested in applying what you did here to their art or their history?
I am going to be living abroad. I'm going to Spain and Greece for a year. I have a Fulbright fellowship. So some of my work, previous work has been related to metal corrosion, and I've especially worked in the area of outdoor sculpture. And so my collaborator in Greece specializes in marine conservation, so particularly shipwrecks. I enjoy scuba diving, and so I figured I could go scuba diving on sabbatical and work on corrosion of metals. So, yeah. Artwork, let's see, other projects in my lab have involved Japanese woodblock prints, Arthur mentioned manuscripts. I've studied a collection of Ethiopian manuscripts. So, yeah, anywhere. Chemistry allows you to go anywhere.
What amazing thing I find, all the countries, they have their specific colors. If you go to France, any place, how do they manage, what distinguishes? Any comment?
It's really exciting when a culture has their own distinct colors. But when other people find out about that color, they want it. And so that has driven trade for centuries. So Ellen mentioned lapis lazuli that was used in the Virgin Mary's robe. Lapis is mined naturally in Afghanistan. And it wasn't produced synthetically until the 18th century. And so blue has always been a challenge, but another example comes from the Americas, carbonic acid from beetles, from the cochineal beetles. And so in Europe, there's another insect that produces kermes, also carbonic acid. So the exact same dye, but not in as high concentrations. So as soon as the Europeans found what the indigenous peoples were using for their dyes and saw the intensity of the color, they imported those desiccated, of course, those insects grow on cactus in the Americas. So they couldn't grow in Europe, but they would dry the beetles and use those for dyeing. So it's really been, so there are key dyes throughout history that allow you to connect back to cultures, but like I said, once other people hear about them, they want them. People love color, and I think that's universal.
I have a question about royal purple.
Yeah.
You mentioned scuba diving. That's the connection I see there.
Yeah.
structurally, what's going on there, and why was it isolated as such a small area, and why is it so darn precious?
Well, Murinex comes from sea snails, you probably know, from the Mediterranean, and I don't know very much about the biology of those particular sea snails, but I assume that they like warm waters, and so the Mediterranean suits them well. But yeah, I mean, that was what the Phoenicians had, so the Phoenicians discovered that purple, and that was one of their major trade products, and that's how they became dominant in the Mediterranean, was through that trade.
Was that also then applied to wool and some similar work?
I believe so, but I think primarily it is used for cotton. And so cellulosic structures are different. And so there are certain dyes that are fast to cotton and others that are fast to wool.
Thank you.
Can I add to that? The shell with the snail, I should say, that the color comes from these minute quantities out of each snail. So it actually takes a very large quantity, and like a table's worth full, to get enough to dye a garment, which is part of why it's so uncommon.
So I'm thinking, I've got a FTIR sitting, the ATR attachment, and I've got students coming up with some projects. Do you have any guidance for, well, first of all, will the FTIR have enough sensitivity to pick out dyes, and maybe a place to start some select students?
FTIR cannot be used on fibers themselves because of the wool background, because you'll see wool. Wool, has very nice amide bands in the IR. So you would have to separate the dye from the substrate. Potentially, you could identify dried dyes by FTIR. Of course, another challenge with FTIR is that you can't use water. So with raw mock, you can use water.
Well, it's a diamond ATR, so.
Yeah, so you would dry your extract down and dry it onto the diamond and then analyze it that way. One of the challenges is but by doing so you're concentrating everything in there, and so for wool in particular, there's a huge background of palmitic and stearic acids, and then also because of the nature of these blankets that they're handled, they have all kinds of molecules associated with people, like hand lotions, soot, all kinds of other stuff. And so I would separate. I would do separation, but I think still sensitivity. And that's something about dye molecules that's important about them, is that the molar absorptivities of those dye molecules are very high. And so you can, with low concentrations, you can achieve the color, but the molar absorptivity for those vibrational modes by IR is extremely low. And so it's
another
a challenging
technique.
I have an IR microscope, and we do not use it.
I'm kind of curious about your capacity to identify a dye if you don't have some other link to knowing what might be there. How much information can the instruments give you in terms of structure?
Yeah, well, it helps to have some reference materials. So conservation scientists around the world are trying to build up spectral databases of historical materials so that there can be comparisons made. For synthetic dyes, because there were thousands of dyes that were made that are no longer available, perhaps because they just didn't work very well, they weren't very light, fast, or they washed out, or a variety of other reasons, maybe they were
expensive to make, they're not available. And so we don't have those in our modern databases. So like in the NIST or widely mass spectral databases, those don't exist. So that was one of the challenges in encountering all of these synthetic dyes, is that we didn't have a lot of reference materials to go off of. So we acquired reference materials that we could, but we could not obtain all of them. So we're able to say generally these are triaromatic dyes, and then from mass spec we can make more educated guesses about what the substituents were on that skeleton structure, but nailing down precisely what they are, which dye they were, is a big problem.
Is there any interest in applying some chemical treatment to prevent the degradation of color in the dyes, or that will affect the heritage?
Yeah.
Can you repeat this question?
Was there any interest in trying to apply some sort of preventive conservation to prevent the damage to the dyes? Not that I'm aware of. Just thinking about the individual chemistries, because they're all different, it's hard to imagine sort of a one-pot treatment. And I'm not sure if the community would want that. My sense is that they probably wouldn't, that's not part of the ancestral practice, and that their primary goal is to maintain their living heritage. And so Bella mentioned their practice within the museum that allows the clans to check out robes and dance them in their ceremonies. So I doubt that they would enjoy that. So I think not for this project, but in other cases.
Do you have any collaboration projects with any of our local indigenous people in the area?
Yes, I have been working with the Choctaw Museum, and in fact, tomorrow I'm returning some baskets to them. So the Choctaw Museum is part of the Grand Ronde tribe, which is sort of all over the Willamette Valley, a large I'm interested in other collaborations if you know.
I have two questions. First is, why is yellow so darn prevalent, even if the plant from which you're starting shows no yellow at all whatsoever? See, yellow is just everywhere.
I think I might have to be a bee or a fly to answer that question. I think probably it has something to do with the fact that those are UV absorbing, and that insects can see those and are attracted to those. It's probably part of the pollination process, but that's my guess, but I don't know for sure. They're not part of photosynthesis. Yeah.
So I was wondering why.
What's the
why
purpose?
we're all carrying something around.
Well, I think like anything that drives any of us, it all has to do with DNA reproduction.
Yeah. Another question is quite similar to Eden's. Rather than collaboration with local indigenous people, collaboration with any students just graduating from high school, or interaction with students from community colleges going on in your lab?
Currently, no. It has been, the pandemic has been challenging, but the technical skills that students need to have to be productive, participatory in the lab takes a lot of training, and my graduate students are focused on getting their PhD projects done, and so it's a lot of how much time do they have to mentor, and there's a varying interest in mentorship, but certainly in the past I've had almost 30 undergraduates working in
Well, if there are no more questions, let's thank Tami again for